Hello and welcome to this conversation, Kabul Junction, the road to peace. As you know, Afghanistan has been in the headlines for a peace deal that hasn't really delivered peace, unfortunately. US President Joe Biden has extended the deadline for the withdrawal of US and NATO troops to the 11th of September, which is the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Kabul yesterday to sell the plan, as the headlines say. The Taliban said that the American delay in withdrawal has opened the way for them, and I'm quoting, to take countermeasures, and that the American side will be responsible for all future consequences and not the Islamic Emirate. So where does that leave the peace deal? And what about the role of the democratically elected government in Kabul? What are the security implications for the region? And what does the future hold for the people of Afghanistan? We'll discuss all this and more with our panel today. We have three leaders who have been actively involved in pushing for an Afghan-led solution. Mohammad Javad Zarif, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Iran. Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs, India. And Hamdullah Mohib, National Security Advisor of Afghanistan. Gentlemen, welcome to the Rise in Our Dialogue. Had things gone according to plan, this conversation would have been happening in Turkey, but we're happy to do our bit.
To be with you.
Let me begin with Hamdullah Mohib. You have a peace without any peace, and the Taliban has declared a win. America has declared a deadline for troop pullout. Where does this leave the government of Afghanistan?
Well, hello to you and Minister Zarif and Minister Jaishankar. I think this is a great opportunity. I see it as a time where the Afghans take full control of the security situation in our country. I have said this before on several occasions that Afghanistan doesn't need U.S. combat troops on the ground. What we need is the support to the ANDSF, which we're told and have been assured will continue. And that provides an opportunity for Afghanistan to move forward. On a big scale, in a big picture point, the Taliban have no reason to continue their violence in Afghanistan anymore. The reasons why they continued are now totally out of the picture, and I think it's time for them to make real peace with the Afghan government and become part of the mainstream political society.
The fact is that they're not doing it. In the last month, this month in fact, there were more than 100 people who died in violent incidents in a week. Javad Zarif, in the month of January, Iran hosted senior leaders of the Taliban to exchange views, as they put it, on the US brokered peace negotiations. What is on the Taliban's mind? What was your assessment? Why do they continue to perpetrate violence?
Continue to have conversations with the Taliban, first of all, for our own national security, and secondly, in order to convince them that there is a need for a broad-based peace in Afghanistan, for an inclusive peace in Afghanistan, and Taliban should be a part of that peace. Taliban should not control that peace. The democratic institutions of Afghanistan, which has been the work of the people of Afghanistan for the past 20 years, must remain in place, and it must become even more inclusive with the Taliban abandoning violence and entering a political process. And I believe this is what we impressed upon the Taliban, that Iran is prepared to provide any forum for Taliban and other groups in Afghanistan, particularly the government of Afghanistan, to engage in a serious talk for a movement forward, not threats, not violence, but working for peace. Working for peace within the constitutional framework of Afghanistan, which has been the work of a very serious process in Bonn just about 20 years ago and throughout these 20 years. Now, I believe the announcement, the commitment by the United States to finally withdraw from Afghanistan in a responsible way is a positive move. And it has to be taken in light of the realities of our region, that presence of foreign forces has never contributed to peace and stability in our region, and the removal will lead to at least less grounds for violence. And I think the Taliban should not use this opportunity to increase violence, because as we enter the spring and the fighting season, we need to respect the wishes of the people of Afghanistan that enough is enough. Enough violence is enough. Now we have the beginning of the withdrawal of foreign forces. Now the objectives of ending foreign presence in Afghanistan has been achieved. Now is the time to work for a broad-based government in Afghanistan based on the constitutional frameworks that already Afghanistan has agreed upon.
Dr. Jaishankar, India seems to be the only player that is interacting with all the key stakeholders in this process. In Tajikistan, you met with your counterparts from Turkey and Iran, and recently you met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in New Delhi. You've also spoken to the American leadership. What do you make of the peace process?
Look, Palki, we've always believed that this should be an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled process, which essentially is a way of saying that what is good for Afghanistan should be decided by Afghans. And I think Minister Zarif and Dr. Mahib said this in different ways, but I think all of us are agreed on that. So what I think all of us would like to see today is what is in the collective interest of Afghanistan. And I don't think that's rocket science. I think everybody agrees that peace is in the collective interest. The lack of violence, a point which Minister Zarif made, is in collective interest. Development is in collective interest. Deciding the will of the people through democratic means is in collective interest. So I think, look, the principles are laid out there. We all know what it is. The issue is how do you get everybody to work together on what they say they believe in without getting going a different way because of calculations and short-term interests and pressures from other parties that they may feel. So I think in a way what all of us see in President Biden's announcement is, a big step which is going to take Afghanistan in a certain direction, and it's important that we all work together to ensure that the direction is right and the outcomes are good for Afghanistan.
So we all agree that it's best for foreign troops to withdraw. Dr. Jaishankar, how does India then see the security implications for the region and also for India's developmental efforts in Afghanistan?
Look, I mean, you could argue, there could be opinions whether somebody should stay on longer, shorter, differently. I think many of us felt the word that responsibly, that the presence of Americans there is drawn down responsibly. Now, bear in mind, they're not only foreigners in Afghanistan. There are other foreigners there as well. Where India is concerned, through our development projects, and I'm sure Dr. Mahib will bear me out, I think in all the 34 Afghan provinces, we have development projects of some kind. I think in the last 20 years, we have demonstrated through our actions and projects on the ground what our real feelings are for Afghanistan. So we believe today that there is goodwill for us, that there is a strong Indo-Afghan friendship. And believe me, we really, really wish the people of Afghanistan well. And we will do whatever is in our power, in our influence, in relationship with other neighbors to ensure that, what is the best interest of the Afghan people is ensured.
The Taliban has said that it will take part in any conference. It will not take part till the last foreign soldier has left Afghanistan. Do you think it's simply waiting for that September 11 deadline for President Biden's exit date to make its first moves?
This wouldn't be the Taliban's first mistake. The Taliban had a great opportunity post-US Taliban agreement, when the entire world was watching the Taliban to see what they do, what the group does. There was a lot of discussion around how the Taliban have changed, and that they would be more considerate and more tolerant of others, and that they will take this as an opportunity to lead their group to a more tolerant Afghanistan. When the discussions began post that agreement, first of all, the Taliban went ahead and started a narrative of victory, which was quite off-putting for everyone in the country. The second was the international community's enthusiasm was reduced by their arrogance. And the third, all the Afghans that looked forward to engaging with the Taliban soon found out that, in fact, there is no change in the Taliban. They have wasted these past a few months in not having negotiated their settlement. They have lost their nationalistic credentials, which is something they touted. They pushed a few roads around and said that they are paving roads now, and then soon after that started destroying millions of dollars worth of national infrastructure. We have estimated that we lose around $900 million worth of infrastructure a year to Taliban's destructive activity, which is not helping their nationalistic cause. So they're losing those credentials, they're losing reasons for fight. The Islamic world and all the scholars, including scholars, Islamic scholars from India, came out and said that the war in Afghanistan has no religious legitimacy. So they are losing on every front. And if they don't take this opportunity that is presented to them now, this will be another miscalculation on the part of the Taliban. I think Minister Jaishankar referred to something very important. It's not just the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan, it's also the withdrawal of foreign fighters from Afghanistan, which the Taliban are working closely with and who are involved in destructive activities in our country and will continue terrorism, and that will remain a threat to the region and all. And I think the other important part here is that we are in uncharted territory. There is a lot of uncertainty. The devil is going to be in the details of what we negotiate with the United States in NATO as we facilitate a transition. Now, what level and what kind of support would be provided to the ANDSF? How will this transition take place? And what will the relationship look like beyond that with these and also with the region? This is a time where we work closely with our regional partners to ensure that the transition happens smoothly, and also to ensure that we all work together for a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, in which the rights of all Afghans are protected, and that we maintain our sovereignty and unity in the country. And as we prepare for this, I think this forum couldn't come at the right time, so that we can discuss or engage in a public dialogue about the way forward. But also offline, we will be talking to our partners. I spoke to Ajit Doval this morning about about our views and shared what we think should go and happen as we prepare for this dialogue. But then also to say that President Ghani is perhaps the best person as the commander-in-chief to lead this transition. He was in charge of the transition from U.S. troops and NATO troops in 2014. When the majority of international troops withdrew from Afghanistan. So he knows the ins and outs of what we need to be taken care of. In the next few days, we'll be putting together a team that would work with the U.S. and NATO to work on that transition plan and plan ahead. And like I said, the devil is going to be in the details of the future cooperation. And also in how we come together as a region. There is consensus in the region that came out from the Troika dialogue discussion, and that was which was announced, we welcomed as well, is a united, democratic, and sovereign Afghanistan. And I think we will work towards achieving that, and we are in the best position to do that. Again, I echo Minister Shankar's words of an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled process. This could not be better managed than the situation we're currently entering.
Jawad Zarif, despite everything, it seems all sides are prepared to engage with the Taliban. But we know that the Taliban is not a monolith, and that this is not the same Taliban that was once ruling Afghanistan. Do you believe that the Taliban has changed over the past 20, 25 years, and how?
Well, I have my doubts. We believe that whatever we think of the Taliban, it is a reality in Afghanistan, and they have to be engaged. But based on democratic terms, not based on anybody's individual self-serving terms. If the Taliban want to go back to the 90s, whether their ideology has changed or not, whether their approach has changed or not, but it is impossible to go back to the 90s. Now we live in a different Afghanistan. Afghanistan has gone through 20 years of a new experiment. Of course, it wasn't a perfect experiment, but it included rights for minorities, it included rights for various ethnicities in Afghanistan, it included referring to the will of the people, and these are important developments. We cannot forget all this, and we cannot, I have to stress, we cannot create a vacuum. Taliban should not be asking for a vacuum. Taliban should start negotiating now with the government of Afghanistan, with the people of Afghanistan, with various groups in Afghanistan. There should be broad-based conversations right now. Waiting for an eventuality where there is a vacuum and Taliban want to fill that vacuum is disaster. That is a recipe for a new war in Afghanistan, and we in the region cannot tolerate. We simply, with 3 million Afghan refugees in Iran, we cannot bear more burden. This is just overwhelming for the region. The same is true for Pakistan. Everybody is putting too much into this. It is important to start negotiations for a peaceful way out once we have the necessary terms. I believe it is important to have a concept of peace. I think democratic forces inside Afghanistan need to think about how to bring themselves together in order to present a unified plan for the future of Afghanistan. Because we know what the plan of the Taliban is. They have every right to their own plan. I'm not denying the fact that they have a right to their plan. But it is not going to be the consensus plan for the future of Afghanistan. An emirate is not something that Afghanistan can be rebuilt upon. It is important for everybody on all sides to stress on certain principles. It was important that Russia, in Moscow, everybody agreed on a democratic transition. But a democratic way to address this situation requires the details. President Ghani last week in Dushanbe made a proposal, which I think has some merit, provided that our Afghan friends, first of all, can establish some unity among themselves in the democratic front in Afghanistan, and also present the details of that plan so that we know what can be the way forward. And let me make one final point. It is important that all of us agree on, not all of us, all of the Afghans, because I also agree with Dr. Jaishankar and Dr. Moheb that we have to have an Afghan-owned, Afghan-led, and Afghan-controlled process. This is the only way. Others can help. We as neighbors, other powers can help. We can facilitate. We cannot dictate. This is for the Afghan people to decide. But it is for Afghans to know what at the end of the day they'll be looking at, and then work out the details. It's impossible to start from the details and lead to that big picture. We need to create that big picture, and we need to help Afghanistan create that big picture. In my view, that big picture should be an Afghanistan that is peaceful, that has a viable economy, that has good relations with its neighbors, that is democratic, has balanced ethnic representation in its future government, and has participation of everybody in that future. If we agree on that end result, then we can work out the means to get there. And once again, I believe the withdrawal of foreign forces, responsible withdrawal of foreign forces, is an important element in that end result.
I'm glad you brought up the point of ethnicities, and I'll come back to that. Dr. Jaishankar, first I want your thoughts on how the Taliban may have changed over the past 20 years. And it has said that the Islamic Emirate, as they call it, will under no circumstances put on complete independence and establish the Islamic system. Will the Taliban getting agreement?
Look, it's very difficult for me to say how the Taliban has changed. I mean, perhaps those who are negotiating directly, maybe it's a question Dr. Mohib could answer better than me. I think what is more important is the point which Minister Zarif made, which is Afghanistan has changed and the world has changed. That whether somebody wants to or not, you can't today in 2021 say, well, this was the world in 2001 and that's where I'd like to go back to. Today there is bear in mind, 20 years means somebody who was 1 or 2 or 3 years old in 2001 is in their early 20s today. Someone who was 10 years old is in their 30s. Their living memory is of a very different Afghanistan. And for them, it's an Afghanistan where they are looking at livelihood, at opportunities, at education, at things which people all over the world aspire to. That is why, in my view, it's important that the rest of us, the international community, we have a clear sense of it is finally for the Afghan people, obviously, to determine the future. But I don't think we should let the achievements of the last 20 years, and again, I'm not by any means suggesting that the last 20 years were perfect. In fact, we have our own share of complaints and issues about how things were conducted in the last 20 years. But the fact is, many things have happened in the last 20 years. They are reality today. They are part of, what are the legitimate aspirations and the assumptions of the Afghan people. And I think that's very much a factor. And if I can just sort of, build on a point which I made a passing reference to in my first remark. The foreign fighters, if my memory serves me right, there was a UN report on foreign fighters in Afghanistan. Dr. Mohib or Dr. Zarif could correct me. I think they estimated them at 8,000 or 9,000 or something like that at the beginning of this year. So, look, the real issues today are, let's not debate Afghanistan as we're in 2021, are we going back to 2000? The real issues today is there's a different Afghanistan. What would be a fair outcome, the most broad-based outcome, which will create durable peace. To create durable peace, it has to have a buy-in of everybody. It cannot be the wishes of the most forceful set of people in that society. That's not how durable, understandings are reached and maintained. And it has to have the support of all the neighbors. If you look at the history of Afghanistan, the neighbors of Afghanistan, unfortunately, have very often played a very negative role. So, which is a point, therefore, I had made in Dushanbe, that Afghanistan needs a double peace. It needs a peace within, it needs a peace without. And unless you have both, the neighbors also need to lay off Afghanistan and let the Afghan people do what is in their best interest.
Alhamdulillah, Mohib, your thoughts on this and how the Taliban may have changed and what they bring to the table now. Also, how do you see this Emirate Republic dynamic playing out?
Well, let me begin with and the groups within the Taliban. We're seeing a lot of infighting and factions appearing among the Taliban because they have this wrong calculation that they are going to be in power and who should then lead. So we're seeing that there is a direct friction between Mullah Baradar in Doha, who is trying to create a place for himself among the Taliban. He doesn't seem to have much on the ground, realities on the ground. He tried to create a few fighting groups with Mullah Fazl, but quickly Haibatullah came and made an announcement that that no groups can be created independently, that everybody should report to their representative for each province, which they call governors. Obviously, we don't think that is a right description, but that's what it is. So there is a clear fallout between Mullah Baradar and Haibatullah. Then there comes Mullah Yaqub, who seems to want to exert his influence. So there is another group among them. So that's three. And then the fourth largest one, there are other groups, of course, among the Taliban, but the fourth largest is the Haqqani network, who also seem to be falling out with the Quetta Shura, who try to exert their power over their previous dominance that they considered. So appointing governors in areas where previously it was considered Haqqani chartered territory. That is a third or fourth group, and then we have the group that sits in Helmand. This group then by itself considers itself separate because they don't subscribe to the Quetta Shura and try to be independent of that. So there are several groups that are appearing among the Taliban who are weighing for power among themselves. And if there is going to be any peace deal with the Taliban, it needs to include all of these groups. It can't just be Baradar leading the Doha negotiating team. There needs to be a representative or be a presence of Yaqub's group. There needs to be Baradar and Haibatullah's, Haqqani's, and also then the Helmand group needs to be able to come together and say. So we have one question on that. The second is that there is a lot of parallels being drawn these days with the situation in Afghanistan today. There is parallels with the 1990s, and there are parallels with other countries where U.S. troops have withdrawn from, or where big powers have engaged or disengaged. And I think that's wrong. Both Minister Zarif and Minister Jaishankar referred to the changes that have happened. Afghanistan is not what it was. This is, as I said earlier, an uncharted territory, an area where there is a lot of uncertainties. But one thing is for certain, that those parallels do not accurately reflect, or in many ways don't reflect the realities of Afghanistan at all. Third point is the destructive role that the Taliban can play over the next few years. Now, if they wish to create and remain an insurgency and create fights and be a destructive force, they can. Over time, it will wean out of power. But what they need to know for sure is that they can't take power by force. They can start a civil war, but not come to power through that. Other groups in the 90s and beyond have tried to do that. And I think the Taliban need to learn lessons from those groups, also from their own conduct over the past 18 months. It's important that they think about these realities and think that they are a reality of Afghanistan. But that is the main point, a reality of Afghanistan, not the reality of Afghanistan. There are other groups who are equally a reality of the country, and they all have a place in the Democratic Republic. Everyone can be represented in the republic, and they can come together. They can come together and play a role in Afghanistan and create that united reality of the country. But to think that on their own the Taliban will be able to force themselves on the Afghan people is unrealistic. The fourth point is the ANDSF combat capabilities. Since 2014, the Afghan security forces have been in charge. And since the US-Taliban agreement in February 2020, the Afghan security forces have been in the lead. 94% of their combat operations, offensive operations, have been conducted by ANDSF on their own, independently. And that will continue. Like I said earlier, the areas of support that requires are already being set that will be committed, and we will work on the details with our allies on this. Fifth point is what both the ministers referred to, is the role of the region and the neighbors and proxies. I think the last 18 months made one thing abundantly clear. Was all that had been said about support to the Taliban from our neighbors. Their visits to their bases, their visits to their injured soldiers or fighters, rather, and their abundant discussions and had made it very clear all that was alleged before. It was a reality, but it wasn't clearly seen, has become a clear reality. Now, any further push would mean that there is direct involvement in Afghanistan by a neighbor, which could be very dangerous. The nationalistic forces in Afghanistan are very upset and angry over this, and if this limit is passed, I think there would be a huge problems for the said neighbor in their country by all Afghans who are there and from within Afghanistan. There could be a huge blowback effect that I think could be destructive for these neighbors. So now I think is an opportunity for both the Taliban to take this for the said neighbor and for the region to come together and support that Afghan-led, Afghan-owned and Afghan-controlled process.
I'm getting a lot of questions from the audience, and since you mentioned a neighbor, let me take these two questions for Dr. Jaishankar. One is that does India have any intentions to open communications with the Taliban, and does it even make sense as long as the Taliban are seen as Pakistani proxies? The second question is, how will India maneuver to facilitate a long-term solution for Afghanistan, leaving behind the bilateral differences with her neighbors?
Look, what we will do and not do is not something, obviously, I'm going to discuss in public, not even at the Raisina dialogue. But the situation is evolving, and obviously everybody wants to make the best contribution that they can and shape the outcomes in Afghanistan as positively as they can. So it's something which anybody responsible would consider all aspects of that. Now, the bit about the bilateral difference, there I have an issue, okay? Because I want you to just think back in the last 20 years. What is it we've actually done in Afghanistan? Because somehow, a narrative, I was watching yesterday a program which General McMaster, the former American NSA, was doing out of Stanford University. And he says something to the effect, well, there's a Pakistani fear that the Indians are on that side and there's an encirclement of Pakistan. So let me look at my actions, okay? What do I plead guilty to? I plead guilty to bringing electricity to Kabul. I plead guilty to creating a dam near Herat and allowing agriculture, to creating a parliament in Kabul, to bringing, to doing health clinics, radio stations, building roads, networks. So look at our record. This is actually an absolute fantasy that somewhere our very presence and our activities out there are aimed at Pakistan. I think it's frankly, it completely ignores the feelings that we have for the Afghan people. And it's a feeling which is rooted very deeply in our history and in our culture. So we've always had a very, very clear sense of what our agenda is out there. Our agenda has been a positive agenda. Please look at the agenda and the outcomes of other people and other countries. I wish I could say the same of some of them. So we will do what, in our view, is good for Afghanistan, which is good for the development, prosperity, unity, integrity, democracy of Afghanistan. That's what we will do.
Jawad Zarif, your thoughts on the role of the neighbor that Dr. Mohib alluded to. Also, there's another neighbor in the picture. And recently, Iran announced a $400 billion deal with China, considering China's growing ties with Iran and its close relationship with Pakistan as well. Do you see Beijing trying to take a more active role to determine the fate of Afghanistan? And where does that leave projects like the Chabahar port, which are also essential for the development of Afghanistan?
Well, I think all of us have shared interests and shared threats in Afghanistan. I think all of us need a stable Afghanistan, a peaceful Afghanistan. I think an Afghanistan in which terrorists have freedom to operate is a threat to Iran, a threat to India, a threat to Pakistan, a threat to China, a threat to Central Asia, a threat to Russia, and a threat to the world. We've seen that in 2001. We've seen that in the murder of Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. We've seen that terrorism knows no friend. Terrorism in Afghanistan, now we see the role of Daesh. We don't know who's supporting Daesh in Afghanistan. Of course, we have some circumstantial evidence about people behind transfer of Daesh from Iraq and Syria into Afghanistan. But be it as it may, Daesh is a threat to Afghanistan, to Iran, to Pakistan, to everybody. So we have common threats. We have common opportunities. Afghanistan is a mineral-rich country. Afghanistan, if we provide Afghanistan with transport and transit opportunities through Chabahar, through elsewhere, to the international markets, then what President Ghani has always called basically the unofficial economy in Afghanistan will go away. That economy is the economy that gives rise to drug trafficking, to human trafficking, to terrorism, to violence. And we need to put that aside. Afghanistan has enough resources to build a viable, official public economy that is not dependent on drugs or terrorism or other criminal activities that all these terrorist organizations are engaged in. And it seems to me, from what the Taliban are saying, that Daesh is enemy number one for Taliban too. So there is something that unites us all, and that can be a road to the future of Afghanistan. I believe all of us need to put our differences aside and focus on commonalities. On commonalities, I believe an Islamic emirate in Afghanistan is an existential threat to Pakistan, whereas it's a national security threat to Iran and India. So here we have a similar area of common interest with our Pakistani friends. We have similarly common interest with our Tajik friends, our Uzbek friends, who are threatened by these waves of extremism in their own countries. So there is something to bind us together, and there is massive opportunity. And I think China has the same opportunities. Here, we've made it very clear to our Indian friends, to our Chinese friends, that Chabahar is open for cooperation for everybody. Chabahar is not against China, is not against Gwadar. Chabahar is a place where we can all come together in order to help Afghanistan, to help development and prosperity in the region. India is playing an active role in Chabahar. Chinese are interested in playing an active role elsewhere in Iran and also in Chabahar. And there is enough for a lot of people to engage, and there is enough in Afghanistan to help promote peace and stability and economic development in the entire region.
Right. Dr. Jaishankar also spoke about the achievements in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. So let me start with you, sir, and I would want all of you to share your views on this. Dr. Jaishankar, to your mind, which are the achievements in Afghanistan which are the most important and precious in the past 20 years and the most necessary to preserve as we go forward?
I think there are a lot of achievements. part of that is really a sense that Afghanistan is a common enterprise of all its people, that there is an acceptable basis by which decisions are made, representatives are selected, governance is done. And again, I'm not suggesting any of this is perfect. The fact that other ethnicities, communities, faiths are respected and given appropriate place, the fact that the rights of minorities, women, children are taken care of. And again, in all of this, there are the imperfections. So the fact is, if I were to look at Afghanistan 2021 and compare it to, say, Afghanistan 2001, it can be nobody's case that it is not better. So there are definitely gains. There has been a lot of development. As someone who's been there from time to time, I'm sure Minister Zarif shares the same impression. We have seen the changes which have happened in the economy of Afghanistan, in Afghan society, in the aspirations and the achievements of its young people. So let's also. I grant you, we are at a crossroads today. There are tough decisions to be made, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, I think there are some very, very good things which have happened, which are important for the world to recognize, and which is important for the international community today to work to ensure that they remain very much at play.
Minister Zarif, you spoke about the pluralism, the various ethnicities, and their role that needs to be preserved. What else, what other achievements over the past 2 decades do you think are the most important for Afghanistan to preserve as we look at a future where the Taliban may have a political role?
Jaishankar basically enumerated them in a rather responsible way. I think there are serious problems, but there are serious achievements. The Afghanistan of today, the role of civil society in Afghanistan today is not at all comparable to what it was in the 1990s and 2001. So it is just unthinkable for somebody to imagine that Afghanistan could be brought back to the 1990s. That's just impossible. And we tell that to Taliban. We have a very frank and open discussion with the Taliban, and we tell them that this is a different society, different situation. Of course, Afghanistan has not been peaceful. There has been corruption, there has been drug trafficking, there has been a lot of terrorism in Afghanistan, and all of that are the negatives. But we cannot forget the positive, and we cannot, as Dr. Jaishankar said, throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to preserve what was achieved in Afghanistan. We cannot create a vacuum. Let me underline this. A vacuum does not help the people of Afghanistan. A vacuum only draws in fighting, violence, and a civil war. We need to have continuity. We need to correct the problems. And here, let me underline the role of the United Nations. The United Nations in the best place to basically moderate, supervise what is going to happen. I do not think any power should arrogate this to themselves. It is the work of the international community. 2001 was successful. The Bonn conference was successful because it was under the auspices of the United Nations. All of us helped. I was present in 2001 in Bonn. We all helped. But the Afghans controlled it, and the United Nations guaranteed that the Afghans would control the process. And the United Nations guaranteed that it can pull all the resources together in order to be able to help the Afghans. I remember midnight meetings where the various Afghan groups had differences among themselves, but it was the United Nations who brought us all together in order to help the Afghans reach a consensus. I think this needs to be done again. We need to preserve the achievements, and the most important achievements are the rights of minorities, the rights of women, the right of the population to self-determination, the ethnic balance in the representation of the government in Afghanistan, and the democratic institution. The president is elected by the people. The representatives of Lucia are elected by the people. This has to be the continuation of the process. We need to preserve these institutions. If we abandon these institutions, only violence can take their place.
I'm out of time. I would have liked to have this question with Hamdullah Mohib as well on what you think is the most precious and the most necessary achievement from Afghanistan to preserve. If you could give us a quick answer, Dr. Mohib, in maybe 30 seconds, we'd like to wrap the session after that.
Democracy, I think, is what brings us all together. It provides an opportunity for that pluralistic society. It provides an opportunity for all the realities of Afghanistan to be present. We have seen elections where there have been contestations, and those have been a reality of our country. We came together and solved them, but there were methods and processes for it in the Constitution, and we could work our differences together. I am often asked about all the differences on all the different voices that are coming out of Afghanistan, and my response always is that is the beauty, and that's what we had been missing. We're talking to each other, not shooting each other with bullets. So I think the fact that there is a platform where all different grievances can be aired without prosecution and without fear, and that we are able to talk about our differences and the shortcomings openly, is what creates an atmosphere where any group can come and join. We saw it with Hizb Islami. They came in, Mr. Hekmatyar, he is now part of the political society in Kabul. Now, what he does, we may disagree with, but he is part of that society now. So can the Taliban. I think they need to take this as an opportunity and look at it as a new chapter. Do not connect it, as Minister Zarif said, to the 1990s in 2001. That was a different Afghanistan. This is a new chapter for forces in and outside of Afghanistan, and that would be what my advice to all be.
Indeed it is, and it's a new phase for Afghanistan, a new chapter, as you said, and all sides, all stakeholders will need a new playbook to deal with Afghanistan. Jawad Zarif, S. Jaishankar, Hamdullah Mohib, thank you very much for being here in this session of the Rise Deny Dialogue and for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.